Hello everybody, my name is Wade Bradford. Welcome back to my channel. I'm continuing my conversation about this awesome book. I think it's awesome. Stephen King's book, A Memoir of the Craft on Writing, in which he talks about his early years as a writer. He gives practical advice as a writer and also talks about a very difficult time in his life in which he was hit by a van and thought he was perhaps going to die, or at the very least thought he wasn't going to write again. So I'm talking about this book in different installments. The first section I discussed was the opening of the book up to about page 50, and today I'm talking about around page 50 or 55 or so, going to page 100, which gets us through the portion that he calls the CV of his book. So let's get started. So basically, I've read this book a few times now, and I think it's great for my creative writing students. I think it's great for authors that are just starting out, and I also think it's a wonderful book for longtime authors, especially if you need a little boost or pep talk. So this section of the book takes us through his late adolescence into his early adult years, and we learn lessons about work, about marriage and family. We learn lessons about addiction, and we learn about success. So Stephen King, anytime he's been interviewed, you can tell that he is sick and tired of this question, where do you get your ideas? He talks about that at the beginning of his text, and it is in almost any time someone interviews him, if they ask, hey, where do you get your ideas? You can kind of see this fatigue. At the same time, in this book, in this part of the book on writing, we do find out a couple examples of where he gets his ideas. So a quick example of that is when he is working in a mill sometimes during summers, and it's hot and yucky and difficult work. And there's a dark, creepy basement that some of the workers had to clean out before the mill was closed up and sold. And one of his co-workers had said, oh, Stephen, you missed out. There were huge rats. The rats the size of cats and dogs down there. And so that idea that happened upon him from his co-worker turned into this idea of like, oh, yeah, well, what if they weren't just rats the size of a dog? What if it was much larger than that? So that became his idea for the graveyard shift. But probably the best example that we get in the book is about the origin of his first published novel, CARRIE. He has a memory of working with a janitor to clean up a girl's locker room, and he remembers it being similar in some ways to a boy's locker room, but very, very different in other ways. One of those things was that there was this shower curtain, and he remembers the janitor saying like, oh yes, that girls want to have more privacy than boys in a locker room. So that kind of sticks with him. The other image from that memory that sticks with him is he notices, oh, there's a big difference. Tampons are for sale or available right on the wall. So that sticks with him. And then he also recalls two different women that he went to high school with. One had a deeply religious background, and he remembers moving some stuff around as an odd job for this one girl at high school, and there is the crucifixion statue of Jesus, and Stephen King recalls it being very kind of scary and intimidating. And then the really sad narrative that he retells is about a young woman in his high school that wears the same clothes every single day because her parents are refusing to buy clothes for her, perhaps, and how the other kids make fun of her, and that she's bullied. And after Christmas, she goes to school with new clothes, and she thinks, finally I'm going to be accepted, or at least they're not going to make fun of me anymore. But the students, the girls at school, they still make fun of her. And the way Stephen King describes it is very insightful. I jotted it down in my notebook. He says, the girls didn't just laugh at Dodie. They hated her too. Dodie was everything they were afraid of. Stephen King explains that they continue to laugh at her and make fun of her even when she gets a new set of clothes. And he writes, her peers had no intention of letting her out of the box they'd put her in. Full disclosure, I love Stephen King's books. I got a whole bunch of books over on my shelf. I'm trying to read all of them. I think he's a great author. And it's not because of the scary nature of his books, although I do like a good thrill. It's really because I think he taps into these darker and sometimes more honest and sometimes more beautiful aspects of human nature. And when I first started reading Stephen King as a kid, I didn't expect that. So it was a pleasant surprise the first time I read an entire novel by Stephen King, which I believe was Stephen King's It. I was amazed at how accurately he depicted childhood. I was about 14 when I read that book, and so I felt like, wow, this guy really knows what it's like to be, to be a kid. And so I think one of my favorite aspects is that he finds those little grains of truth and sprinkles them throughout this genre, horror fiction. So there you go. That's my defense of loving Stephen King so much. When he writes the first, 5 pages or so of CARRIE, he crumples it up and throws it in the wastebasket. And it's because of his wife, who goes through the wastebasket, finds it, and says, hey, I want to know how this happens. I want to know how this ends. So a big part of the book is an appreciation for those that love us. If we are writers, it's good to have someone that cares about us, someone that supports us, someone that gives us good feedback, not necessarily someone that, loves everything that we're working on. Be on the lookout for not just people that cheer you on, but the people that love you and support your work, right? So they love the idea of you being a writer just as much as you do, maybe even more so in times when you're desperate. Stephen King says, writing is a lonely job. Having someone who believes in you makes a lot of difference. So Stephen King, at the beginning of the book, lets us know that this is not an autobiography. He's taking autobiographic pieces, but he's not telling his life story, just little glimpses so we understand some aspects of how he developed as a writer. And so some of the things that he touches upon are related to his addiction. So he talks about gradually becoming an alcoholic, starting around age 19. That's the first time he gets drunk. He's on a field trip with his class. It's their senior trip in places like New York and Washington, D.C. He gets so drunk that he throws up and he's miserable the next day, and his principal is basically saying, hey, you're not going to do that again, right? You should probably lay off. Don't make yourself sick. Stephen King says, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm done with that. I just didn't try that once. But the very next day, he's still getting drunk. And so one of the aspects that he's exploring in the memoir is how, for a while, he thinks that alcohol and then drugs like things like Xanax and cocaine and other things like that, the drugs and alcohol start to take over his life to the extent that he starts to subconsciously write about those things. The Shining is about an alcoholic ex-teacher, and Misery is about someone who is trapped and basically becomes addicted to painkillers while his number one fan is torturing and tormenting and holding him captive. And The Tommyknockers is about, if you read The Tommyknockers and you know that Stephen King is on cocaine while he's writing it, the book makes a lot of sense. In his books during the 80s, there's a lot to be said about the themes of addiction that are embedded in the text. And thankfully, he's able to pull himself out of that, again, with the help of his wife and loved ones. So it keeps coming back. Having people in your corner is very good. So one of the aspects that I like about this part of the book that shows Stephen King overcoming addiction is that he's trying to dispel the myth or the stereotype that writers and artists need some type of booze or drug or some type of vice just to cope with the existential dread of the world and and if you don't, if you're not getting drunk while you're writing, you're not going to be able to create art. And so he thinks that for a while he is, part of him is telling himself, like, you can't stop drinking, you can't stop taking drugs, you need that for your creativity. And he says, well, no, it turns out that that's just the addictive side of his mind talking, the side that didn't want to give up on those addictions. And so he doesn't go into great detail, but he gets rehabilitated, and he becomes sober, and little by little he finds that yes, he can write, and he can re-experience the same joy of writing, and the booze and the drugs, that's not part of the joy of writing. So I like that message a lot, because every once in a while I do have a creative writing student that says, like, yeah, the real artists were on LSD, or they died of alcoholism in their early 30s. No, you don't need that. In fact, you can probably be a happier, more prosperous writer without that. So when we're reading a book like this by a successful author, and we're writers ourselves, and we would like to have, some level of success, we often read these books and we're looking for the secret to success. And so we pay very close attention to that first big break. This book, CARRIE, how did he sell this book, and how did this launch his whole career? What Stephen King tells us in his memoir on writing is that an editor/friend of his enjoyed CARRIE very much and wants to publish it, and offers him $2,500 as an advance. Whoa, wait. The thing I want to know is, who's this William Thomspon guy, and how did you become friends? So Stephen King just says, hey, this friend of mine who worked at Doubleday Books, Doubleday Publishing, he liked CARRIE, and he wanted to buy CARRIE, and so he did. But there's more to it than that. I'm going to leave a link to a really cool interview from 2018 with Bill Thomspon, in which he talks all about the origins of CARRIE and how this book came to be, and how subsequent Stephen King books and the overall success of Stephen King came to be. You can read that material yourself. I hope you do. I think it's enlightening. But let me just go over a couple key points that I think are useful to up-and-coming writers. Well before writing CARRIE, Stephen King wrote 4 or 5 other novels that did not get published, and one of them is called Getting It On. It's also called Rage, and it's about a student who walks into his classroom and he shoots the teacher, and then basically holds the rest of the class kind of captive, and weird kind of things happen, and conversations happen, and memories happen, and things like that. So that was the first novel that he sent to Doubleday, and when Stephen King sent that, he didn't know exactly who to send it to, but he knew that he liked a novel called The Parallax View that was published by Doubleday, sort of suspense thriller, conspiracy, Kennedy assassination type book. So he sends the book Getting It On to Doubleday, asking for it to be read by the editor of The Parallax View. So the manuscript by Stephen King ends up on Bill Thomson's desk, and to paraphrase Bill Thomspon, he looked at this book and felt like, hey, this is a good writer. I like this writer's style, but there's some problems with this book. Bill Thomson's only in his late 20s at this point, and he hasn't been an editor for long. He's been in sales, and he's a new editor, and he's bothering people saying, hey, what do you think of this? Or, hey, I like that. You should change that. Oh, so he hasn't made very many friends with the editing, with the circle of editors, his colleagues. So he kind of knows that this book, Getting It On, is not going to make his fellow editors happy, and that his publisher is not going to want to proceed forward. But he likes the book, and he likes Stephen King's writing a lot, and they write back and forth. Stephen King works on making all of the changes that Bill Thomspon suggests, and eventually Bill Thomspon has to, or decides to, write a rejection letter saying, hey, I'm sorry, I know you worked on this book, but we're turning it down. The article that I have a link to has the exact, has a photocopy of the rejection letter, so that rejection letter is worth looking at it. Basically, it's a good rejection in the sense that the editor is saying, wow, I'm passing on this, but I really like your work, and I want to work with you. What else have you got? So Stephen King will then send him books like Roadwork, The Long Walk, The Running Man, and anything else? Oh, and The Body, that's turned into Stand By Me. And each one of them is just not the right match. But he knows that he likes this guy's style, and he encourages Stephen King to continue submitting. Cut to, Stephen King comes up with this idea, inspired by some of those memories of high school. And when he sends this off, that's when Bill Thomspon says, yes, this is it. I'm ready to march on. So Bill Thomspon has read and rejected several other books by Stephen King, but admires his writing very much and senses that there's something great about Stephen King, his books, and his writing. So when we get to this book, there's been a lot of rejection already, and Bill Thomspon is excited to be the champion of this book. What that means is he's going to tell that round table of editors, like, we need to go with this. This is amazing. And he's going to tell sales and marketing, like, this book's going to be a hit. We need to give a green light on this. And who knows what he needs to tell the publisher, but he's pushing for it. So to get this book made, Stephen King needed a champion, a knight in shining armor, someone within the business, a gatekeeper, if you will, that was in love with the book, in love with the work, and perhaps more importantly, loved working with Stephen King. So Stephen King wasn't some pompous jerk that was saying, no, I'm not going to change anything about my work. He changed a lot about the ending of CARRIE. Apparently, according to the interview that I read, Bill Thomspon says that the end of CARRIE, our tormented protagonist with telekinetic powers, say that 3 times fast, instead of just using her telekinesis to really ruin prom, she turns into this giant monstrous creature with horns that shoots lightning at planes. And so the ending of that book, the original ending, Bill Thomspon felt like, whoa, that's not the ending that we should go with. Let's make some changes, and Stephen King does. So he loves his writing style. He loves the stories that he's coming up with. He loves the development. He loves the development that he sees in Stephen King, and perhaps most of all, I'm guessing that he might have loved the flexibility of Stephen King. And so for those reasons, and probably many more, he becomes the champion of Stephen King's work and the publisher of some of his first and most beloved books. So that's the overview of his early days. The book then gets into techniques and suggestions about the craft of writing, and I will cover that in another video. So if you like this book, I would love to know why. If you don't, I'd love to know why as well. Stephen King's obviously not for everybody, and Stephen King's advice is not going to be for everybody, but it's been helpful for me, and maybe it's helpful for you. So if you haven't read this book, I definitely recommend it. If you were thinking of writing novels, it's on the top of my list. That's it for now. Thanks for listening to me ramble on about this book. I'm going to be rambling on about it a little bit more. Hopefully next week I'll have a third Stephen King on writing video for you. Until then, take care.